Thank you, Kirti, for thinking of this very pertinent and timely topic and bringing together people out of the work they do to come together to dream together and hopefully to work together in the future. Uh, in terms of setting the agenda, I want to build on what Rupa and Deepaji have said. I think, in terms of, and also this comes from our experience of working with private sector, with the public sector, with the social sector and community organizations, which are actually very well represented here. So, looking at the whole aspect of inclusive growth from a broader perspective, we are trying to look at models of economic growth that benefit all groups of people and reduce inequalities. And that means we have to look at the participation aspect of growth, we have to look at the distributive aspect of growth, and we have to look at the qualitative aspect of growth. And sometimes I think we are getting carried away. So we have a wonderful GDP growth rate, 6.8%, acceptable. And we can say China is 4.6%. The country that supports India on technical cooperation, Germany, has 0.2%. So how do we compare? How do we compare growth? And for me, one factor or one other element of looking at growth from an economic or a country level perspective is also looking at going beyond to look at the Gini coefficient. And when you start looking at a Gini coefficient, which is actually looking at income, wealth, consumption, inequalities, and then tries to look at the gap between the richest and the poorest and tells us the direction of growth we are taking, then it also sets the agenda of inclusion we need to work on. And then what we're seeing is India rates at 34.2. It's again not a perfect metric, but we are somewhere close to Sudan and Mongolia, and even South Africa, which is an imperfect democracy, as we've seen recently, is at 63. So that means the income distribution, the wealth creation, is somehow not being distributed equally. And there have been a number of studies from Oxfam. We have the ILO survey of rate of unemployment. So increasingly, we are faced with a daunting challenge of jobless growth, increasing youth unemployment, reducing women participation in labor force. So these challenges are all known to you. I just want to put them out there to say that we have come a long way, but yet there's work to be done. So while we are celebrating, how do we look ahead? Now, in terms of growth or getting growth to be moved, one element, of course, is the individual. And I think what Deepa showed was the power of the individual as well, right? How people can dream, come out. And agriculture is full of such stories. The riskiest business going around is agriculture, right? But also, in the Indian reality or in any reality, individuals in a larger macroeconomic, socio-political system cannot change everything. So we come together. We create community and business associations and organizations. And India has a rich tapestry of it. So Raman Wadhwaji leads, along with his team, a very interesting global process in India called the Self-Help Group Movement. Almost reaching, I think, 1 crore, almost, self-help groups, each of 10 to 15 women, and their federations now. Many of us work with FPOs, and increasingly, numbers are anything from 7,000 to 9,000 or 15,000. But another set of formations. We have a number of joint liability groups, farmer groups, all sorts of other interesting institutions created. We have cooperatives where there's a renewed vigor to look at them. Just the PACs, the primary agriculture cooperatives, formally run into lakhs, but only 47% of them are profitable. So we have this huge process of response going on, and these are all not challenges, but the way I see this is these are all opportunities waiting to be worked on and taken forward. Now, I think when we talk about this numbers, maybe just to tease out a little bit of the qualitative aspect a bit, what still is a challenge, or what is the canvas on which we are working on? So you're looking at social factors of exclusion from caste, gender, religion. We may imagine they don't work, but they still operate very strongly. How do we deal with them? How do we create a inclusive space where people are able to come forward? There's still an issue of access and control over natural resources, and therefore the ecological dimension, Kirti, that you talked about. How do we look at common lands and common property resources? How do we look at a whole system of agriculture where almost 35% are sharecroppers? They're not even formal farmers. They don't figure in any list. So whatever we design or target may not reach them. And then look at the situation of women as farm owners. Even though they do most of the work, they are not formally represented. I think the whole aspect of financial access is something which we have done well, including the digital systems which are working well. Access to knowledge and technology we will talk about. But I think two parts that I think cut across even this group of people is, one is this whole digital divide. So it is a divide. It is an exclusion and an inclusion. And especially with AI coming in, which group will grow using it and which won't, we need to pay attention to. And the whole aspect of climate and disaster. The people dying out there out of heat wave are the most dispossessed people, people on the streets, people with no voices. So the climate is going to make the whole aspect of vulnerability, exposure, and impact even stronger. But then, this is not a negative story. This is the real story. And the best part of what we have to do today is to share from these pathfinders and the change makers how they have looked at all of this and how they have tried to solve these issues. What are the learnings from them to us? So I will start with the first question, and I'll come and sit down now. The idea here is to each one of you to take up that question, maybe 2 to 3 minutes, because it's a very short session. And the idea is to put out your key messages. And as Kirti said, there will be a lot of follow-up discussions now or later as well with key people who are interested. So to each of you, based on your own and organization's journey, what does inclusive growth in this sector of agriculture and allied fields mean to you? And what are some of the key drivers that you have seen work well through your experience in the Indian context? Yeah. So who'd like to go first? ऐसे चलेंगे.
Okay. Thank you, Rajiv, and thank you, Ecoshiate, for inviting me. Great opportunity to share my thoughts with all of you. So, Rajiv, your question, let me try and answer in the way the organization that I belong to, Safe Harvest Private Limited, has evolved and the thoughts behind that. Safe Harvest was formed by 8 farmer organizations, and it's in a way a very unique organization. It's a private limited company, and the stakeholders who actually are the founders are these 8 farmer organizations. And over a period of time, it has attracted private capital who probably share the same kind of a mind space as these organizations. The second is that Safe Harvest actually markets pesticide-free products which come out of sustainable farming practices. And the logic, the inherent logic which Safe Harvest cannot escape is the fact that pesticide-free agriculture or any kind of sustainable agriculture practices cannot be done in isolation. So a collective of farmers, a collective of land is extremely important. As you all know, 85% of India's farming is done by smallholder farmers. And unless and until farmers come together to a certain kind of a concept or an idea, it's very difficult to kind of propagate that or take it to scale. So this is an integral part of what we do. That is formation of collectives of farmers. And typically, because you're dealing with a country like India, you're working here, and 85% being small farmers, these are collectives of small farmers. And as Rajiv, you pointed out, and the earlier speakers also spoke about it, that much of the work on a farm or off farm is done by women. And so it's important to recognize the effort or acknowledge the effort which women put into agriculture. That's number one. And number two is that if you want to take an idea forward, it's not possible without people or individuals who are actually putting in the maximum effort into that initiative without getting their buy-in. So women have to participate. Why am I putting it like this is when I got into this kind of work and when I became part of Safe Harvest, these were some things that I could not escape. We had to do it. Thanks to Kirti, who came later to me to meet, gave it a name, inclusive business, right? So I was not aware that this had this, and today I have a two words to explain what I do, and that's inclusive business. So, and this is the second part of it, that it has to be a collective, it has to be done by many people to make it possible. And the third is we are engaged in sustainable agriculture. And why is it so? Because during my work of 30 years before I became part of Safe Harvest, I was in tribal India, I was in tribal Madhya Pradesh, part of a non-profit, where one saw at very close quarters of how climate change actually impacts agriculture and the small-scale farmers. So any change, any vulnerability in terms of weather conditions or anything has a direct impact on the smallest of the farmers. That has a first impact because their capacity to absorb any kind of shock is extremely low. Sustainable agriculture somewhere builds that capacity. So you are making farmers move from a very risky environment to let's say, a less risky environment. So that is something that brings, let's say, a more inclusive sort of environment where you are actually trying to reduce risk. And that is a very important part of any kind of inclusive business that you are trying to build, because those who are part of this are stakeholders, their risk level needs to go down. So that's the third issue. One of the most important things is farmers actually do not, and especially small farmers, do not have control over the produce of what comes out of the land for very long. See, so the chain of custody is such that they have to actually sell their produce very quickly to any other agency who's part of the value chain very quickly, because the money required is like working capital for the next crop or for their needs, etc. So the idea behind this business is the fact that you want the farmers to be able to hold on to their produce as an organization, as a collective, for as long as possible. Now, a primary commodity would make it slightly more difficult. So the idea behind Safe Harvest, one of the issues that we deal in is to make these organizations climb up the value chain. And what it does is manifold. It's a win-win sort of a solution. It's not as if we are doing a kind of a service to the farmers, because when you make farmers or farmer organizations climb up the value chain, one is that they hold produce for you. So it's not something which comes into my inventory. That's number one. The second is that you are giving an opportunity for farmers and farmer organizations to have a higher share of consumer rupee. So they have to deal with a commodity, not just as primary commodity, but you have to develop skills so that they can actually reach a stage where they would probably be able to service the market with a retail quality product. So, you have a higher value product, so they have a higher share of the consumer rupee. So you are actually dealing with the markets directly. So it may not today, it may be only Safe Harvest. Tomorrow there is an opportunity to deal with other organizations, and we don't mind that. And lastly, it's about scaling up. It's very great to build a model which serves a small community. But many times when I've seen that when you scale up, the problems of scaling up arrive and you have to deal with, and sometimes you see failures happening. And that is where we started with 8 organizations. Today there are 30. We work with more than 100,000 farmers. The family is growing, and today you see that many of these organizations are climbing up the value chain, and that think is part of inclusivity, because it's about sharing. It's about sharing and recognizing, acknowledging that they are also our stakeholders. So in the strictly in a profit making business model, they may not be my shareholders, but yet the idea is to pass on, because as you pass on responsibilities, and it's a kind of a sharing of responsibilities which comes only when you think in an inclusive sort of way. Otherwise, it may not happen. So, thank you. So, these are some of the points.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks to Kirtiji and the entire Ecosphere team for inviting me here. I come from a very small organization that is, as of now, just catering 10 crore women organized into SHG pool, and still the number is growing. But our approach is to include them all those who are vulnerable into an SHG movement. What has come over a period of time or a decade is that how you can make them better. So one concept, what Mr. Ehil was saying, is that you need to reach out. So that reach has been done just by including them into the institutions of poor. But still, a lot of things are to be done, and we adopted a distinguished approach. One is having them into the institutions, SHGs or village organizations, or the CLFs, cluster level federations. These are just acronyms, but today they have become actually the key names across all the government and the partner organizations who are associated with, and many of them would like to have or want to do work with these institutions, because the term which is the social capital, the social base, that has been built across the country through NRLM. As far as some kind of financial approach or processes are to be there, some 8.5 lakh crores of bank linkage has been done, but still the financial inclusion is not complete. If I average it down to an individual member, it will go pretty less. And the point now is how we can make them include into or saturate them into the livelihoods processes. So inclusive growth, when we say or understand, it's not that we are creating institutions, enabling them to understand the concept of thrift and credit, but we want that they should be able to do some kind of better income or have an income generating activities through livelihood procedures or processes. What Mr. Rangu was saying, that we need to have women. So one benefit which NRLM has is it's all women program. So one thing which we can say or boast of in the country is that the women are there who are into an organized sector. But saturation approach or the inclusion through livelihoods is a long way to go. Through our farm sector or the farm wing, we have been able to reach out some 3.65 crore women into the agroecological practices. But point is that is just training, capacity building. numbers and incomes are two different things. It's how we can make them earn income. So that is one part which is actually required, and much is being done. So we feel like that almost 30-40% has been reached, but still miles to go to reach them and enable them impact into the agriculture system. Another better part of the NRLM is into the institution. What has worked is the entire base of community resource persons. I would rather say that the processes which was only the women who were there to adopt processes only to mobilize other women into SHGs, now there is a specialized wing of women in all kind of activities. So there is a BC Sakhi. People are aware of that, the banking correspondents. There are Krishi Sakhis, there are Pashu Sakhis, there are Honey Sakhis, there are Udyam Sakhis, there are we call them enterprise Sakhis or CRP-EPs. Whatever is the need in the village, rural areas, this entire social capital, that is the community leaders have come up. And this is actually the key change which is helping the entire gamut of activities in the NRLM ecosystem. Recently, we have now an MOU at larger scale with Ministry of Agriculture and Farmer Welfare and also with DASD. So what we say is that you are enabling SAG members get into institutions. Second is you are being supported by those who have come out of poverty or are into the leadership approach. Though partners are there, that cannot be left out. Third is how you recognize them. So the Krishi Sakhis, they are being certified through larger institutions in the country like Manage. DASD is supporting them in the form of A-Help, that is the livestock promotion, Krishi, Pashu Sakhis is there. So they are also being certified. So that kind of build which is there means you have an institution, you have financials, and you have the supporters within themselves. That is one, I think, a bigger part that NRLM has brought in. Another point which is coming in is that when Deepa was talking about persistence inequality, that is there. But having said that, within a group, within the entire system of poor people, can I reduce that inequality? Can I fill in those gaps? At least that is coming up. So reaching out to the vulnerable, to the left outs, be it of the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, or any other women-headed institutions, or those who are disabled. So one is that part. So within those institutions also special program has now been created, and we are now working on an ultra poor strategy. So let's bridge the gap within those also. That is also an important part, and it is actually helping. Next important part is that how NRLM works for creating employment, or I would say the self-employment opportunities. So in the farm sector, it's not about enabling them understand about any kind of farming practices. We have tried to put in some kind of subsectors. Say a team is there which is working on aquaculture. They are training them, they are capacitating, and I'm happy to share that today we have some 9 special projects on the fishing and aquaculture systems. So this is how, this is one example, aquaculture. It's in tomato, potato, and other things, and reaching out to the ground level. And this entire thing is now leveraged through an institution called Producer Groups and FPO, what Mr. Angurao was also speaking. So it's not the numbers. If I brag of there are some 1135 or so FPO producer enterprises which are there under the NRLM system. Point is that how many of them have reached to a proper level of better turnovers. So it's our thought, it's our vision that let them have at least a turnover of not less than 50 crores or so. Today, if I count, these are small, much small, not in even in crores. These are only some nine which are there, which are in some 100 crores, 1950 crores and above. Still, if I compare it with those 1135, its numbers are just peanuts. So the approach has to be that let's work on those institutions so that we have larger institutions and help them have better incomes. Last point which I would like to say is about the technological interventions and the environmental sustainability where the NRLM is working and it has worked well. As far as environment or nutrition or climate change things are concerned, we have our cell called Food Nutrition Health and Wash, which is facilitating and working in integration with various partners and within the institution with the farm sector to enable women on various kind of nutrition aspects, be it lactating mothers or children or any such things. But point is reaching out to the lowest level because NRLM is a huge program, but still much is to be done in all these activities. What has come again to our mind is that can't we work together on climate change aspects? Because what other speakers were talking about that climate, whatever we say, the vulnerables are the first one who get affected. So with support of various organizations, we're trying, let's go in a phased manner how we can impact or enable them understand both about farm non-farm practices which are there, or means I'm not using the technical terms just to make it simpler, but point is that an ecosystem, an environment for the inclusive growth has been created by NRLM, and I'm sure that it will not be a glimmer of proof. It will be a larger, light of proof which will come over the next 3-4 years or so. Thank you.
So just I'll also keep wrapping up as we go along. So Ranguji, the model that you have shown us is growing from the core. So there's a strong core, it's growing outwards, and then it can have multiple hubs and can grow like that. The model that Raman Bhardwaj is putting out is that at scale across the country, a whole institutional infrastructure of inclusive groups with financial access, with extension people to work with them has been created. It's a plug and play model. He's inviting everybody to come and work with those institutions, right? So this is really, and then there are models on certain themes which can all again be scaled up. Fully there to be picked up and taken forward by any business or development organization who's interested. Okay.
Thank you, Raman. I think it's very difficult to come after Raman because he creates the scale at such a level that you get scared of what to talk about. But we have been doing this in some of the conferences now, both of us sitting next to each other. But this time you went first, next time I'll go first. Okay, no problem. To start with, I think it's a very interesting phase we are living in. When I say that, because if you look at the growth trajectory, we are so wow about India being 6.8%, 7%, and then you look at the shifts that is happening in our economy to look at agriculture as such, and then to food systems and all that comes in. So this entire shift we are seeing in terms of various key sectors that we are working on: agriculture, manufacturing, services. If you look at these three, agriculture is not going to drive the growth. That's what is coming out very clear, right? That's why we have added food systems into it. Then we're looking at what are the jobs there, how do we work on jobs, and blah, blah, blah comes. Then you have to look at where is the rural space going in this? Because if you're talking about agriculture, you have to look at rural space. And India, if you look at next 25 years, 50% of the population will be urbanized or looking in urban locations. So let's think about inclusion and inclusive growth from the perspective of how the economy is moving. And then the lens will change very, very differently. Look at labor, the migration, and what is happening with the labor markets and how the wage labor and all is moving. So I think we need to keep an eye on that and look at that. Second is on the issue of how do you link the opportunities that is coming out of the urbanization of India and that impact it is having on diet, food demands, and the production side of what we are doing. There's more demand for more natural products, maybe more protein-rich products, all that. So how that is having impact on the entire agriculture sector as such of the production side. So how do you look at that is very important. And lastly, how we are going to work in isolated locations, because many of these new wellness kind of products are coming from isolated location. When I say isolated location, it's mainly people who are still not using a lot of pesticide, fertilizers, but still going in a natural way of farming. And then how do you link that into a more inclusive growth model? I think these are the basic 3 points I want to put up front. So for us to think little bit in a, I may say so, from out of the box kind of a thing, because otherwise we just go into the social capital aspect. Important. So let me come to social capital. So we have been working, many of us worked in civil society organization. Our core has been to mobilize, get aggregations going for what? So we say we do mobilize to address the factors of exclusion of location, maybe social status, cultural barriers, access, most of this thing. When we go back and look at all that mobilization we have done across various formats of installation mechanism of SAG platforms, producer group, producer companies, cooperatives, you name it. So it's there. But are we able to move the needle on the exclusion factors related to location of where I am? Okay, are we able to move the needle in terms of the social status of from which community I come from and what cultural barriers are restricting me to participate or be included in economy? Are we able to move those needles? Are we able to really address the issue of access on finance, access on opportunities, access on various resources that we have to, particularly in the natural resource side also, and water, it's a big issue around water when you come to access also. And lastly, and then third point I want to make it, I have two more points. Third point I want to make about is all this social capital we have created, the trust, the cohesion, the groups, everything, women at the center of it, the centrality of women in making the economy move. Are we really able to convert them into economic outcomes or not? I think that's where the challenge is. We have been working on livelihood aspects, but making it to convert into economic aspects of business. And what you talked about, Rupa, in the beginning about inclusive business, is where the challenge is. And I think that is what is an important question to ask as we move along. How do we make the business inclusive to what Raman was talking about, to bring them to this platform and leverage that? And are we able to leverage the social capital created into more economic inclusion and thus inclusive growth? I'll stop here.
So I think one very important question you pose is, when do we stop looking at them only as social organizations and start looking at them as inclusive business organization? And I think there's an ideological challenge here, which underpins the way the government programs, schemes, the development organizations think. So is it only the process or is it the end outcome? And then how do we work? And for that, we've already seen and heard many experiences and examples. So I think, is it immoral to think of social organizations as business organizations? Or are they antipathic to each other? Or can they coexist? And how do you make them coexist? I think these could be interesting areas to work in. Yeah. Over to you.
I can talk about this, but I'll avoid, क्योंकि अभी लंबा इशू है वो. तो देखिए, पहला तो हमारा थोड़ा फॉल्ट ये है ना, बिग फॉल्ट इज दैट दिस इज, आई थिंक, इन द लास्ट 25 years, इनफैक्ट लास्ट 15-18 years, बिकॉज पहले 5-7 साल तो कोई पूछता नहीं था जब हमने गूंज शुरू किया था. दिस इज द फर्स्ट ऑल मेल which I am a part of it, and it's a complete oversight. मैंने देखा ही नहीं था, मैंने आज सुबह नोटिस किया और मेरी टीम ने भी गलती की है. अदरवाइज आई जस्ट रिफ्यूज, एंड विच ऑल ऑफ अस शुड डू दैट, क्योंकि हम यहाँ पे आके बात करेंगे बहुत सारे इंक्लूजन की और यहाँ एक्सक्लूजन हमारा यहाँ से शुरू हो जाता है. तो ये बड़ा फंडामेंटली गलत हो जाता है. एंड व्हाट आई विल डू इज दैट आई विल नॉट टॉक अबाउट द टेक्निकल इश्यूज एंड ऑल दैट. आई विल टॉक अबाउट सम फंडामेंटल core issues in this entire thing. आज की डेट में बहुत सारे लोग पीपल कम एंड टेल अस दैट गूंज गिव्स डिग्निटी टू पीपल एंड वी से नो बिकॉज हमें ऐसा लगता है कि नो वन कैन गिव डिग्निटी टू एनी वन. डिग्निटी इज अ पार्ट ऑफ अवर सोल. वो हमारे आत्मा का हिस्सा होता है. और समाज सोसाइटी कैन ओनली डू कपल ऑफ थिंग्स. आइदर इट कैन रिस्पेक्ट डिग्निटी और इट कैन चैलेंज डिग्निटी. तो जब आप किसी के पैदा होने के बाद उसको भी बताते हैं कि वो छोटा है कि बड़ा है, वो अपर कास्ट है कि लोअर कास्ट है, लिटरेट है कि इलिटरेट है, वॉट समाज उसको बताना शुरू करता है. एंड that's how you create issues. तो मैं आई वॉज जस्ट थिंकिंग अबाउट इंक्लूजन एंड आई वॉज थिंकिंग दैट मे बी इंक्लूजन ऑल्सो इज अबाउट व्हेन यू रिस्पेक्ट पीपल एज इट इज, कि वो है क्या और वो कैसा है, आप उसको एज इट इज एक्सेप्ट करते हैं. तो मैं बहुत बार फार्मर्स के बारे में, बिकॉज अवर हार्ड कोर वर्क इज इन द विलेजेस ऑफ इंडिया. वी आर ऑलमोस्ट 1200 पीपल. हार्ड कोर रूरल डेवलपमेंट, वाटर, सैनिटेशन, एनवायरमेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. ऑल्दो हमारी इमेज कपड़ा इकट्ठा करके बांटने की है, जो बहुत गलत है. हम वो नहीं करते हैं, हम अलग काम करते हैं. वी आर अ वेरी डिफरेंट इकोनॉमिक मॉडल. और मैं अक्सर सोचता हूँ कि यार ये ऐसा कैसे होता है कि आप ऐसा फार्मर जिसने द फार्मर हु हैज एक्चुअली कम आउट विद थाउजेंड्स ऑफ डिफरेंट वेराइटी ऑफ राइस, एक किसान जो 2 आम की कलम जोड़ के तीसरा आम निकाल देता है, आप फार्मिंग को अनस्किल्ड प्रोफेशन कहते हैं. हाउ डज इट ऑपरेट? मैं स्किल्ड हूं क्योंकि मैं थोड़ा पढ़ा लिख गया हूं. कुछ भी करता हूं तो मेरे काम को इनोवेशन बोल देते हैं लोग. पता नहीं, आज लोग कहते हैं गूंज में 50 इनोवेशन हो गई, मुझे दिखती नहीं क्योंकि वो तो बहुत सारी हमने गांव से उठाई हुई हैं एज इट इज. और फार्मर हर रोज इनोवेट कर रहा है और आप उसको अनस्किल्ड कह रहे हैं. फिर यहाँ पे शहर में बुलाते हैं, 15 दिन की उसको प्लम्बिंग की ट्रेनिंग देते हैं, फिर सर्टिफिकेट देते हैं, कहते हैं स्किल्ड, which is nice, of course, but that also shows that for the last 30 years you were actually not skilled. तो जब हम उनको, और अभी यदि वाकई इंक्लूजन हुआ होता है, मुझे बड़ा तकलीफ होती है जब हम कहते हैं वी हैव कम अ लॉन्ग वे. ये मैं भी बोलता हूँ कई बार, मुझे बड़ी तकलीफ होती है. मैं कहता हूँ देयर इज नो डाउट अबाउट इट, बट इज इट नॉट अ केस कि हमारी बेंचमार्किंग बहुत लो है? वरना हम 70-75 साल 80 साल के बाद तो सेम बात ही कर रहे हैं. मतलब 25 साल से तो मैं भी सेम बात कर रहा हूँ, सारे फोरम में सेम ही बात बोलता हूँ, सेम डायलॉग बोल के आता हूँ, सेम सुन के आता हूँ. तो मुझे खुद भी गुस्सा आता है कि यार ये लफड़ा क्या है ये लाइफ में. इज इट नॉट इम्पॉर्टेंट दैट वी रियली चेंज अवर लैंग्वेज एंड अवर लेंसेज? वी स्टार्ट मेकिंग पीपल स्टेक होल्डर. विद वॉट राइट डू वी कॉल फार्मर्स ए बेनिफिशरी? मतलब कोविड ने तो हमको सिखाया है ना, ये कोविड में हमें से हर एक इंसान को डॉक्टर की जरूरत नहीं थी, खाने की जरूरत थी. तो हम डॉक्टरों की वजह से जिंदा नहीं बैठे हैं यहाँ पे, बहुत सारे लोग हम किसान की वजह से जिंदा बैठे हैं. तो किसान एक्चुअली आपका बेनिफिशियरी नहीं है, आप किसान के काम के कांस्टेंट बेनिफिशियरी हैं. व्हाट आई एम आर्ग्यूइंग अजय है इज दैट इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टू चेंज अवर lenses and language when we talk about the inclusion. I mean, in our sector, and when I say social sector is not isolated. All of us are a part of it, right? बहुत कॉमन वर्ड होता है डोनर बेनिफिशियरी. और मैं लोगों से पूछता हूँ कि भाई, कल भी मैं था एक फोरम में, आई वॉज रेजिंग द सेम इशू, वी वर टुगेदर एक्चुअली, एंड आई वॉज रेजिंग द सेम इशू कि यदि मैं टाइम लगाऊं तो मैं डोनर, कम्युनिटी टाइम लगाए तो वो बेनिफिशियरी, मेरा पैसा सामान लगे मैं डोनर, वो बांस का पुल बनाए, कुछ करे, बड़ा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का काम, उसमें पत्थर लाए, बांस लाए, तो वो बेनिफिशियरी. मैं टाइम लगाऊं तो मैं डोनर, कम्युनिटी टाइम लगाए बेनिफिशियरी. मतलब ये है क्या? उसकी विजडम नहीं है क्या? तो आई थिंक इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट दैट वी रियली एग्जामिन कि हमारी इंटेंशंस अच्छी हैं, हम सब लोग बहुत मेहनत करते हैं, वी ऑल आर ऑल्सो आउट ऑफ अवर वर्क फॉर अ डे कमिंग हेयर टू टॉक अबाउट इट विद ऑल द गुड इंटेंशंस, राइट? बट क्यों हम उस लेवल पर स्केल नहीं ला पा रहे हैं? मे बी बिकॉज वी आर नॉट इंक्लूडिंग पीपल एज इट इज with their skills, considering them a stakeholder and not as beneficiary or donor or whatever. I'll stop here. I'll come back. Thank you.
So, I think this is a very important aspect in the sense of we still haven't got rid of it. There's a very interesting work in natural farming that we are supporting, and we realize that it is so knowledge intensive, and the knowledge is actually with the farmer, which is traditional, and then some modern knowledge coming from scientists. But all of our research projects, the scientists are only the guys who studied in university. So actually, we are supporting work in Andhra Pradesh at a large scale, where there's an academy for Indo-German agroecological research and learning, where the farmers are the scientists, and they're called farmer scientists. So they already have a science, they know it, and then there is a little amount of structuring of a scientific postulate and hypothesis sort of a framework that is shared with them, and they go back and do that research from a different perspective. It's not just experiential, but it's more logical and structured, and they come back then with an evidence in a different format and share with each other. But we are facing so much resistance. Everybody from ICR to everybody says, ये क्या है? इसको तो हम नहीं मान, हाँ, power, हम नहीं मानते इसको. हाँ, yeah. So we need to do more of this. Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you for inviting me to the panel. And yeah, basically, I would like to begin from the work that Foundation for Ecological Security does. We work largely on the conservation of natural resources at the community level with community institutions, which are of varied kinds, be it for community forest rights, be it for say if we are looking at pastures, the Charaga Vikas Samitis, or are these are institutions of various kinds, but doing the basic work of conservation of the natural resources based on all what as communities, as collectives do, and based on which this entire economic enterprises that we are talking about is based. And the context today, when we are talking about, we are looking at the degradation, increasing degradation, both of forests, our pasture lands, water resources, degrading soils, and if we look at this entire institutional structure across the country, we see institutions for resource governance as the weakest kind of institutions across the country. We had this devolution through the Panchayati Raj system. The Panchayati Raj system today is more of an implementing organization than what we would say as a governance institution. What was envisaged was panchayats as local governments, and that is something that there is a real vacuum at that space. The work that we have done over last 35 years, which initiated as a pilot project between National Wasteland Development Board and National Dairy Development Board to look at what could be the institutional arrangements for governing these wastelands, or it was then when this satellite imageries came up saying that so much land is degraded and there is a need to address this. And we were at a stage where we were looking at social forestry as failing because there was no institutional backup to the resources being created. And that was an experiment which led to looking at, can cooperatives be a model to conserve this forests. But 10 years since the beginning of that project, we learned that cooperatives are actually not a good model for resource governance, especially because the legal architecture in our country around cooperatives, which looks at profit as an indicator for its success. But what we also learned and voluntary membership as part of the design, what happened is it was only people who were interested being part of the institution rather than people who are really dependent as part of the institution. And actually at the end of 10 years when we started thinking, we were thinking that we were actually looking for cooperation and not cooperatives. We were looking at member control, but not member exclusion, and we then shifted into what we call as universal membership as part of this entire journey, because it is actually the poor who are dependent on these resources for their livelihoods, and those are people who cannot be left out. The institutional framework for governance, again, when we're looking at, we also need to look at how this institution governs resources, who gains and who loses. And usually, in most of these cases, what happens is when it is elite members actually are being part of decision making, the mechanisms that you come up is usually like auction mechanisms like these are the products that are available which can be traded, but the key thing is none of the poor have the ability to purchase anything for beyond that particular day or 2 days. They lose out on all these mechanisms of auction. So how do you create mechanisms where poor and farmers who are regularly dependent on fodder from their grazing lands, how do they purchase fodder for the entire year? How do they? And these are questions that are constantly being need to be discussed and asked. The shift that we have happened from collective irrigation mechanisms to private irrigation mechanisms, where we actually forgot that aquifers are commons, and that is something that we need to look at how governance of those resources are necessary, especially if we look at actually is it lack of understanding, or is it lack of a proper thinking process behind it, whether it is two bore wells in a village which can be used for distribution of water by the panchayats or by the government, or is it every household should have the bore wells, are questions that needs to be worked. And that is where especially our learning has been that one, what is important is to look at the polycentricity of institutions that exist, and how do they work together with the formal system, and how do they engage is important. The second part I would again like to bring in is we need to strengthen the governance institutions, and all institutions using resources or being part of that should be services, should actually be the larger say should be from the governance institution than from the merchandising institutions, and it is then you would have a better governance of the resources as well as better growth.
No, thanks a lot, Subra. So I think this is very important for you to point out that even in my list, I did not mention panchayats, and they are the most important governance institution at a local level, which actually can and should be pushing for inclusive growth, despite the realities of being a contractor, panchayat, and all the other issues I see. So how to shift? The other thing that you're talking about is this whole informal conversations, rules, agreements, very contextualized to the resource, the people, the traditions, and the needs, right? And then how to bring them into a formal process, which is not it's not sent from above, but it's actually created at a lower level, and we're not seeing much of that happen. So I think a lot of the experiences that you have gained and you popularized, I think, are all also available from there. Now, I think we've all been able to share very richly what each of the organization is doing. And since we only have 9 minutes left, I am going to surprise you with a different question. So it's to each one of you as and when you're ready. Actually, you started by saying it's a community of practice and learning, right? So how do we, I mean, we need to deepen what we are doing, where we are doing, and then we need to expand it to areas where we are not doing. It cannot be done by us alone. So this whole aspect of population scale results. So I want to ask each one of you, what is it that you need to enhance, grow what you're doing to a totally new level, whatever level you think of? And what is it that you offer to others that you think is ready and is important and you're willing to give it so that somebody can take it from you as an institution? So, because that's how we'll find ways, even as 5 people, to do something with it, right? And this process can then go on. So, who'd like to go first?
Thank you so much. I'll take 45 seconds. So, one thing which is important is that we work on a belief that women or the community has an innate capacity to come out of poverty. And it's a core belief that we are simply the facilitators. So, what you said, what you need, as far as an RLM is concerned, we need the expertise of you all. What Mr. Ahil was also talking about, that there is a need to provide regular capacities, and there is a need to have HR, human resources, who can help capacitate the persons, and that too with some kind of dedication, which is of course there in this room, which is essentially required. And it can be through any kind of processes. We already have, yesterday only I fingered out how many partners I have. So there are some 35 that are supporting only in livelihood sector, and almost similar in the social processes. So there is a need to have the partners or the people who can help support this entire gamut of activities, because alone it's not possible to reach out to such a big number. And what Samik was trying to say, can there be a larger economic growth, not the economic growth, if I could make out, from those smaller social institutions, the SHGs or the VUs or the CLF. What we have to offer only the larger landscape of women SHGs who are there, and is a larger social capital that can be of help to them. Thank you.
So for us, I think the need and offer is largely same. Okay, because whatever we are doing, we can only say it with our practice, what we have learned and all that. One is a fundamental shift in the language. So when we even use the word poor, we have a problem, fine. And there's a complete movement which we are building called Gram Swabhiman on that, because it's very important to call people economically weak instead of calling someone poor, because then everything comes under that, and people just lose their agency. People also do not understand what strengths they have, because they are labeled as poor. And that is something which we can offer with experience, what we have done in a big way. And also, of course, that is a need to shift that language all across, number one. Number two, somewhere a massive dent on the charitable models, because charity kills dignity of people. Sustained charity is really, really a curse. Right? So in our flagship model, which is called Cloth for Work, it's a symbolic model. So we collect tons and tons of material. It goes through rigorous process by matching the need. But to thousands of people across the country, it never goes free. People pick up their hardcore development issues. So there are hundreds of kilometers of roads which we have been able to do. When I say we, it is the community. Right? They have been able to repair roads, dig well, clean ponds, create mangroves, like anything. Some 70,000 odd such big projects in the last just 9 years, where this material becomes a new currency. And dignity is at the core, because you give a shirt to someone, say, Meri hai, bolega haan aapki hai. But when you make a road and get it, you say, Meri hai, the person will say, aapki hogi, but I've earned it. So that fundamental shift in the language. So this is something which we need from the people and which we can certainly offer as practical experience and nuances and what are the problems when you do this radical approach. Thank you.
I think I'll just extend what Anshul said. Basically, to look at community as stewards, not beneficiaries, is something that is, especially when we're looking at from the resource governance side, that is an important shift that we need to look at, because we should not be looking at it as they're implementing programs, but they're conserving the resources for themselves and for the larger society. What we need to look at is entire governance through a system lens rather than as a sectoral and independent kind of activities and independent kind of institutions governing each component of the resource. There is a link between forests and farming systems. We can't separate it out, saying farming is different and the conservation of commons are different. There is unless we look at the cyclical things that go on at the community at the local level, we don't appreciate it because finally what happens is we try and segregate it into programs and address it through programs. That is a means to provide funds probably, but that is not a means to govern the resources. That is something that I would like to raise this issue on how do we do it, but as an offer, we work across states, and we have models which actually can be looked at, and we can work towards scaling it up.
So, well, just two thoughts. One, and both are, often repeated statements. The first being, let a million flowers bloom. So, we are not an agency which can take care of all issues, or even the issue that we are tackling. We are not probably adept at tackling it at the desired level or anything. So, maybe there should be other organizations, other entities, profit-making entities also, where decision making is not all inclusive, but inclusive to a large extent, where all stakeholders are involved. This is a difficult exercise, but yes, it has to be done. That is at the core belief of the organization that I am part of. I'll just stop there because I think probably working at scale is an important aspect of any work. And in my own experience, I've seen that as organizations build scale, they start faltering. And it's important that you recognize those kind of limits and allow for other organizations to also, take up part of the, responsibility or the job that you have set out to do.
I think we are at a very interesting stage in the World Bank because we've been supporting since last 20 years the entire Rural Livelihoods Program with various state governments and the national government, and that incubated the NRLM program in India. And it's a $3 billion kind of portfolio that we've been working with the government at various states. At this stage, we are facing the challenge of taking it to the next level. How do you bring in the entire economic agenda into the work we have been doing in the rural development sector? So we are looking at co-creation. We are looking at ideas that we can take to scale, co-create, and work with the government and with our global knowledge to build a program around it. And I think those discussions are going on now. So we are looking at opportunities to co-create, learn, and to see that what are the ideas that are scalable that we can take into our program design and work with the government to take it to scale. Because the only player in the game which can scale up is the government. All said and done. We can only experiment, million flowers will bloom, but if you want to show scale, we need to recognize with all the difficulties we face with the government, we have to work with the government to take it to scale. We are very small player in the overall game.
I'll just add to that. You see, there are many things which fall in the private sector domain, and probably many things the private sector cannot do, and in most cases it will not do. So there is no mindset to do it also, and probably that's where the state has to step in. Just to add to what you're saying, and the biggest thing of that is an enabling environment, which the private sector will not be able to do it and will not, because it's all about opportunities, it's all about market opportunities, which private sector is looking at in many of the cases, whereas the state is talking about an enabling enterprise an environment which needs huge investments, and I think only the state can do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think another thing that we're looking at is also to identify the areas where public investments required from, because we are not very clear as many. We go with a lot of assumptions for public investments, but if there are certain disconnects, gaps where public investment is required to create a level playing field or enabling environment, those are the areas if we can identify it and very clearly focus on, these are the areas in which we need to work for public investments. That will be helpful from the World Bank kind of a perspective to take it, because our financing goes as a public investment.
Yeah.
Simply to
So-
add
Yeah.
that let good vehicles come from the private sector, good roads will come from the public sector.
So the Indian model is very interesting. So the public goods in India usually have never happened from private sector. Whether it was the roads, whether it was the mobile network that was first established, and what we call the digital public infrastructure. It needs a sovereign framework and an investment. But then it should not get stuck with that. The BSNLs should disappear after a certain point. After a certain point, the groups that have been created, the private sector. So I think between the social, the private, and the government, I think we've talked about the roles. But the success of India has been government started it, created the ecosystem as an initial thing, and then let it play itself out, and then be an arbitrator and not an implementator, a neutral arbitrator. And wherever this has happened, it has happened well. But I think the story of inclusion left to itself will still not play out. And there we will need a far higher discussion, engagement, and involvement. So I think there the role becomes stronger. So there's a business side and inclusion. So there are no perfect answers, no silver bullets. We heard quite a lot of things that work. I hope there have been good takeaways for all. I just think that there are a couple of frameworks which were partially mentioned here, which we find very useful. So one, of course, is this whole way of looking at the ecosystem from an agroecological perspective. How do you look at the agriculture and the ecology, not taking away from each other, but contributing and growing to the next level? So looking at that framing, because that brings many things together, these moving parts, how do you bring them together? And then how does it impact on the food system? The other thing from an inclusion perspective, from a country which runs the world's largest social protection program called Mahatma Gandhi Narega, is to see how this world's only budgetary allocation, which is statutory and derives from the fundamental principles of constitution, and is legislated for every government to follow. How can we use this? How can we leverage this? And this thought I want to leave with you, because a lot of the work that is happening around adaptive social protection, how do we use this? So a lot of the work we do with some of the partners here is to leverage the MG Narega money for ecological restoration, for long-term correction, and to help build the base for future business activities. I think a lot of the work the SHGs are doing, they're doing very closely with MG Narega. So I think there are these other large flowing rivers. I mean, you're looking at a resource of something like $9 to $11 billion a year as a budgetary allocation. And if you look at, and if you look at all of the donor contribution in India, including philanthropic, is less than 1% of the GDP. So I think we have resources, we have the intent, we have the experiences. I think it's just a matter of doing it. So with that, over to you. Thank you.